Welcome everyone. Super excited to have you here today. I'm joined by Pete Kazanjy, and we'll go ahead and get started in just a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, we usually like to ask our panelists a fun little icebreaker. So Pete, when and where is your next vacation?
I think probably what we're going to be doing, I just took my family to New York to do like a hybrid work and kind of like fun trip there. I got to visit a bunch of Atrium customers out there, had a really rad customer kind of community event. Going to be doing the same thing in Atlanta coming up the week of the 18th and July 18th. So that should be pretty cool. But I think probably like the next like for realsies like vacation trip, we'll probably do like a weekend trip up to like Seattle or like Portland or something, because my 4-year-old really loves the Portland Museum of Science and Industry. I forget what it's called. OMSI. He loves
Oh,
that
that's
place.
awesome.
Yeah, it's
That's super
super
cool.
rad. Yeah, it's amazing.
Do you guys ever take him to, what is it, the Exploratorium or the Academy
Oh
of Sciences?
hell yeah! Oh yeah. Mikey's like huge. Like we live in San Francisco, and he's a California Academy of Sciences addict, right? So we probably do that
Yes.
like monthly or a couple times a month, and then Exploratorium is more of a quarterly thing, in our
Okay.
our operating rhythm for the 4-year-old.
Love that. I mean, every 4-year-old needs their operating rhythm.
In the Kazanjy household, they do.
True. Awesome. Well, can't wait to hear how all those trips go, Pete. But let's go ahead and
Yeah,
get started today. So
let's do it.
super excited to have everyone here to talk about Pete Kazanjy's playbook to managing remote reps.
Yeah.
We're joined today by Pete Kazanjy, Atrium's co-founder and CRO, who is also the founder of Modern Sales Pros. Today's event, as I'm sure you know, is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. MSP's mission is to create an environment for their 25, maybe more like 30 now, thousand growing members to answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. MSP does that through incredible live sessions like what you're about to experience today, through their robust online forum and in-person events. For those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. And if you don't hesitate to drop the team a note via modernsaleshq.com. There's a fun little chat bubble with Gina's face on it. So let's go ahead on to the next slide. Thanks, Pete. If you love this content, you're going to be obsessed with what's going on for MSP's 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening July 12th through the 14th. MSP has pulled together 16 incredible content tracks with speakers from companies like ZoomInfo, SalesLoft, Clary, Gong, and might I add, we're not even just having speakers from those companies. It's like the CEO, president, co-founder,
it's pretty
CRO.
rad.
I know the lineup for this is absolutely insane.
It's bananas. Here, let me just I'm just gonna swap it in here because it's so rad. Like, look at these people, right? Look at this guy right here. He needs a new headshot. Like these are, yeah, we have fantastic speakers.
Yeah, so we'll drop a link in the chat for that, but get signed up. Like we said, there's going to be basically a dozen virtual events, and then there's going to be in-person events. And yes, we're bringing back the Modern Sales Pro Salon in San Francisco, New York, and Austin that week. So sign up to get the details, and I hope to see you there. I'll be at the San Francisco one.
So fun.
Register via the chat. And then on to the next slide. So before we get started, I'm going to just spin through a couple housekeeping notes. I know we're all super excited to dive in and to let Pete run the show from here, but there's just a couple things you should know. Please use the chat panel and Q&A function. We'll get to the questions in the chat, and Pete loves following up post-event with answers to complex sales questions. So happy to do that. And then, yes, this event is always recorded, and you will get the slides and the recording afterwards. So, and if you don't get that, actually, you can go ahead and head to modernsaleshq.com and head to the previous events page where all recordings live. It's an awesome library of content. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Pete, co-founder and CRO at Atrium, who is also the sponsor of this session. Pete, take it from here.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm super pumped to be here today to talk about managing remote reps. For folks who don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that literally exists to help sales managers, AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use metrics to improve team performance. And of course, the way that Atrium does that is by providing a world-class harness of metrics right out of the box. Takes about 3 minutes to set up, but then importantly, statistically monitoring them, helping those managers understand where there are issues that they need to jump on, where there's areas of success that they need to replicate across the rest of the reps, and essentially just like help them be better managers, better SDR managers, better AE managers, better sales leaders through the smart application of data. And yeah, and as noted, it takes about a couple minutes to set up. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, kind of having better visibility onto your teams, your remote teams, as an example, you can head over to atriumhq.com. It takes about 2 minutes to set up an account there. You can just sign in by connecting your Salesforce account. It's a read-only connection, and be on your merry way with a free account. Before starting Atrium, I started a previous software company called TalentBin. That's that ridiculous sweatshirt that I'm wearing there in the picture, is a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And so at TalentBin, that's kind of where I went from being a business generalist founder to being our first account executive, our first sales manager, our first sales leader. When we were acquired, the company had around a 20-person sales organization. And then at Monster, I was responsible for new product sales across 1,000-person sales org. And then subsequent to that, I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales. And actually, in fact, I think what we can do is we can drop a link in the chat if anybody wants a copy of that book. We actually, we have lots of them, as you might imagine. We're happy to go ahead and send you one. So we'll drop that link in the chat if you guys want a copy of my book. So that's me. I think about sales just a bit here and there. And I'm really excited to talk today about managing remote teams successfully using data. Before we get started into that, I think another thing that we're going to offer the community here is a set of my favorite kind of like data-driven sales management books. A couple of really great ones here. Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon, who actually we're having a fireside chat with at the MSP Summit. It's like John McMahon, former CRO of PTC and a number of other software companies as well. Cracking the Sales Management Code, the best book on sales metrics out there. It's like the Bible of sales metrics by Jason Jordan. And then one of my favorite books on sales coaching, 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach by Hillman Sori and Corey Bray. And then of course, as a kicker, we'll include a Coffees for Closer Yeti mug there. So I think we're going to drop that link in the chat here. If you want to go ahead and sign up for those books, you can go ahead and do that. All we ask for in exchange is a quick disco chat with one of our teams. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and talk about managing remote teams. So the reality is that most organizations at this point have either a fully distributed team or a hybrid team at this point. I think probably more and more it's not fully distributed. Like I'm sitting here on our sales floor here at Atrium, and we have we have sellers who are in the office, but we also have remote sellers as well. And so anytime you have hence hybrid. So anytime you have a situation like that, you have to manage as if you have a muscularly remote team, and so that's just going to continue to be the case going forward. And as you'll see here, this is something that folks just expect to get bigger and bigger, right? So the reality is like we got to start paying attention to this and realizing that this is the reality of sales management in the 21st century. And so one of the things that you have to just be aware of is that remote, hybrid work, remote work kind of creates a handful of issues specifically related to the fact that you have limited visibility and communication friction. And so what that means is what previously you might be able to execute by just kind of sitting in the bullpen on the sales floor and being able to do management by walking around, or as I like to say, kind of organic, instrumentation by osmosis, kind of just by sitting in the middle of the sales floor. That doesn't really happen anymore, right? That's not tenable. Even if you have a sales floor where some of your reps are sitting, that's not the case with the other reps outside of that. And so what we need to do that comes out of that is address a number of issues that kind of that show up. So there's a bunch of different things that show up that people can definitely take their foot off the gas, not just because there's a lack of social accountability, but like, sales is a hard role. And so you need to have that esprit de corps of kind of everybody else in the grind together. There's a number of other things as well that people can work on the wrong things. They can work on the wrong ops. They can forget the ops that they need to be working on. And like all manner of balls can be dropped. And so like really where this kind of comes from is this removal of social cohesion, the removal of like eyes and ears based instrumentation for our management. And then the reality is that like this kind of crept up on a lot of people. I mean, certainly in like early 2020, it definitely crept up on people. It didn't creep up. It kind of like surprise showed up in a big way. But it unlocked and revealed the immaturity of most organizations, kind of current metrics based instrumentation and management harnesses. And so that's like really the big thing that people need to get good at, is that they need to take that information, or they need to enhance that part of their management behavior. And so and of course a big kind of piece of this is the reduction of organic team esprit de corps that can negatively impact the organization. So there's a couple of different steps that you can use in order to kind of fix that, and that's what we're going to talk about here. We call it the 4 steps to hybrid, right? It's the follow the yellow brick road. So first, you got to use metrics as your eyes and ears, because again, that the kind of the organic instrumentation has gone away. That's okay. We can use metrics to solve that problem. Second, we need to set and track the right goals, and then third, we need to establish our operating rhythms, right? To make the things that might have previously not been intentional, right, but happen just kind of like organically through management by walking around. We now have to make sure that those are declared and intentional in an operating rhythm. And then lastly, what we have to be able to do is like use these things right here to detect issues, troubleshoot them, and then resolve those issues. And so these are the steps that we're going to be going through here today, along with a fun little case study that actually popped up recently in one of Atrium's customers. So first things first, let's talk about using metrics as our eyes and ears here. Boink. Cool. Okay. So the good news is that there's this actually is doable. This is something that more advanced organizations, more kind of like more modern organizations have been doing for a hot second, and using data-driven and metrics-based management to effectively instrument and manage their teams even before they were remote, right? There's a number of modern sales organizations that saw the benefit to this just from a managerial excellence standpoint and a performance improvement standpoint, and implement. So this isn't a new thing, right? It's more kind of one of those things where like the future is here, it's just not widely distributed. And so some of the benefits that kind of come out of this, of being metrics driven, is that one, you can now see what you couldn't see in a remote work situation. Secondarily, you can use that information to coach your teams to be as effective as possible, and detect issues before they become problems, and kind of like nip them in the bud. And on the converse, you can identify outperformance on parts of your team and then generalize those across to everybody else. What comes out of this is really a reduction in management by opinion, which really is nice for reps, and the morale issues associated with this. Like, you don't have to worry about being the heavy as a manager. Like, oh, I think that you're doing, like, I'm getting a sense about XYZ. It's like, it's right there sitting in the numbers. And that really makes hard conversations or coaching conversations a lot more straightforward and a lot quicker when you don't have to have opinions involved. And so the next question might be, okay, well, like, that's cool, but like, what metrics should I be using? And so the kind of the first step there, these are a couple of principles that we should use in order to select those metrics that we might want to be paying attention to. So the first thing is, we got to think about, like, okay, what are the teams that we should be instrumenting? Because different roles are going to have different needs for metrics. So for instance, like, and then also the time intervals that we use to measure them are going to be different as well. So as an example, we all know that you should probably pay attention to bookings for account executives. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. But what's the interval on which I should pay attention to those bookings? Well, if it's an SMB with like a higher velocity motion, it's probably something that we can measure on a monthly basis. If it's a mid-market rep, well, maybe we're looking at it on a quarterly basis, right? If it's something where we're looking at new opportunities created by inbound SDRs that are maybe a little bit higher volume, that might be something we measure on a per week basis. If the expectation is that they're doing 5, 10, 15 new opportunities or like new meetings booked a week, we might look at that on a per week basis. If it's an outbound SDR where it's like a little bit harder, for them to get things on the calendar, maybe we're looking at that on a monthly basis, right? So that's the first thing, is like think about like what are the teams that we're going to be instrumenting. The next thing is, okay, well, what do they spend their time doing? And so that's the thing, or what do they spend their time doing, and moreover, what do they, what ought they be spending their time doing? And so the really what you want to do is like look at that and say, oh, okay, are they supposed to be making outbound dials? Wonderful. Well, that seems like that's a metric we should be paying attention to. Should they be having customer-facing meetings? Like a prototypical account executive, it's probably something we should be paying attention to. Should they be sending emails? Right? That's probably something we should be paying attention to. Should they be multi-threading within the accounts, like interacting with lots of contacts within an account? Because maybe there's more of an enterprise motion or multi-stakeholder behavior. Maybe we should be paying attention to contacts engaged per account. So it's just kind of like, hey, think about like what they should be spending their time doing, because that's going to inform the things that we should be measuring. And then next, what we want to do, and this is something that I'm a big advocate of, is that you should really just start basic and then get more advanced. And so what I mean by that is like you'll have all manner of folks kind of like telling, oh, like here's this like magic metrics you should be paying attention to. It's like this special dessert topping one. It's very complicated because I'm so smart, etc. No, 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 no. Really, what you want to do is just like start with like the meat and potatoes first, get good at that, and then start adding more sophistication. A lot of times what ends up happening is like people get wrapped around the axle about some like arcane metric that doesn't really matter, or they think that it's like the god metric or whatever. Or moreover, what they do is they spend a lot of time kind of like going around in circles arguing about oh, what's the ideal metrics harness, what should we be measuring, and like weeks and weeks and months go by, whereas really you could have just started. And so that's the kind of key thing here, is like just start, and then you can always add more to it. You can get more advanced over time, but you should just start, and don't overthink it. So here would be some kind of recommended metrics by role. I think actually on the Atrium Resource Center, we have like a guide, like a guidebook, or like a guidebook on metric selection and metric selection and kind of publishing. So maybe we can drop a link to that in the chat here. But like these are the things that you should probably be paying attention to on a per role basis. And so you can see we've got our inputs here, we've got our outputs here, and then importantly we have efficiency/quality metrics here. And so I'm not going to go through all of these. You guys can check them out later. But really what you would need to do is you need to do all of the above. You need to look at inputs, you need to look at outputs, and you need to look at efficiency and quality metrics. And so what I'll just touch on really quickly is oftentimes people are like, I only pay attention to outputs. I only care about outputs, right? That's all I care about. Usually what that is that's an indicator of somebody who's like afraid to manage by metric. That's kind of like a fig leaf of I'm not willing to like get into the root of things. The other thing that people will say, and like you have to do that, right? Like if you only like, where do outputs come from? They come from inputs, right? If you're only paying attention to bookings, but you're not paying attention to new opportunity inflow, or the number of opportunities that are advancing, or like how many customer facing meetings are happening, guess what? You're never going to be able to understand if somebody is pacing towards the right bookings without looking at these things first. So anytime someone's just like, oh, I only pay attention to outputs, usually what you've got there is you got somebody who's like, probably covering up for the fact that they should be paying attention to these things, and they're implementing a less modern, kind of more old school, more archaic management approach there. The second thing that people oftentimes will say is like, well, but you can't measure quality. It's actually not true, right? Oh, sales is an art. right? Like, oh, you're trying to science this. Sales is an art and a science, but it's executed by people who can be measured. And so efficiency metrics can definitely be, these efficiency and quality metrics definitely can be measured. Usually what those end up looking like is ratios, right? So as an example there, SDRs, you want to measure the quantity of execution, like inputs and outputs, but also you can look at these quality metrics in order to understand, are they engaging in the high enough quality of execution, right? So an example of that would be like email responsiveness rate, right? Like if somebody's putting in a bunch of effort, email engagement, unique accounts being engaged with, but the opportunity creation isn't showing up, well, the result that where that might be coming from is a insufficient email responsiveness rate or insufficient touches per account, right? Somebody touches an account once and they set it down again, or insufficient multi-threading. They're not touching enough contacts within the account in order to get the account to pop and turn into an op. And so these things can be measured in a meaningful fashion, right? These quality metrics, you just have to do it. So that's the first thing around kind of like metric selection there. Next, what you have to think about is, where can I get the data? Importantly, what we want to do there is, the more we can automate data collection, the better off we are there. And so the good news is like a lot of these, a lot of like your sales engagement solutions and what have you will do automatic logging of email, calling, meeting volume, et cetera, and send that over into the CRM in a way that you can later on report on it and kind of visualize it and monitor it. This is actually one of the reasons why specialized data-driven sales management solutions like Atrium hook directly into the email system, the calendar system, in addition to the CRM, in order to kind of help with that data capture and logging problem. If you do need manual data capture, just be very thoughtful about how like how much kind of like overhead you're putting onto your staff in order to do that, because it just turns out that can be like, anytime you're asking your staff to like log something manually, just like be mindful about the fact that it's going to create friction in their workflow, and think about like, can we do that in an automated fashion in some sort of capacity? Because that would be more ideal, right? That would be better. Cool. So that's around metrics and kind of like and data. Excuse me. That's around like metric selection and and kind of like selections and implementation there. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about setting and tracking the right goals. So once we have those metrics in place around what it is that we want to be measuring, well, next what we have to do is we have to set and manage by goals, and not just goals on those output metrics, but also goals on those input metrics as well. And so I actually do a master class on managing and managing by goals. And so this is going to be kind of like a little kind of like mini version of that masterclass in a couple of slides here. But and maybe we can actually drop the hyperlink to that goal masterclass here. But so kind of the high order bit here is like, why would we want to track goals? And so the answer to that is, well, the reality is that we want to win, right? But then the problem is like, that's like a very, very far output metric, right? Like winning the game. And so the way that we know that we're on our way to winning is by goaling on and kind of tracking those precursors there. There's actually a book that I'm a big fan of by Bill Walsh called The Score Takes Care of Itself. And the name is kind of in the title there, where like one of the big things that Bill Walsh was the coach of the San Francisco 49ers and also the Stanford Cardinal football team. One of the big things that he would talk about is like, look, it's very difficult for you to directly impact the score, but what you can do is you can focus on the precursors. And as a football player, that can mean like whatever your job is, like do a really good job of running your route every time, do a really good job of blocking the person you're supposed to block, do a really good job of running the ball every time. And then if you do that with excellence, the score would take care of itself. And so that's what we want to focus on, is like having our players execute the right quantity and quality of gameplay. The score will take care of itself. And so some kind of like examples here around how to do this, to kind of analogize. yes, we have these outcomes here, like, you know, in baseball it's runs, and in basketball it's points, and in football it's points. But then moreover, we have these inputs that we should be paying attention to and goaling on. And so, for instance, like, let's use baseball as an example, because I grew up playing baseball and I'm a baseball fan, right? We can't just like focus on runs. What we want to also be looking at is, hey, are we getting on base? Right? Are we getting many bases? Are we doing a good job of getting hits? Are we getting extra base hits? If we're a pitcher, it's not just a question of are we avoiding runs and preventing them. Like, where avoided runs come from is by pitching many strikes, right? And avoiding walks. And then moreover, you have the flip side of this as well from an efficiency and quality standpoint. It's insufficient just to say, hey, we want to focus on these precursors right here. We also need to be looking at things like, you know, to use batting as an example again, are we doing a good job from a batting average standpoint, right? Like, maybe we're getting a lot of hits, but we have a lower batting average, and it just happens to be that we're early in the lineup and we're getting lots of at bats. And so what this will help us understand is like how we're doing from an efficiency standpoint. Cool. So one, we want to get granular on setting these goals for these reasons. And the second thing is that we actually want to be very human in how we set these goals. And what I mean by that is that it's insufficient for us to set goals at a team level. Oftentimes organizations will do this, is to say, hey, you know what? I want the SDR team to create 200 ops this month, right? The problem is that by having team level goals or like averages, that actually hides individual performance. And the funny thing is about like human organizations that draw, like, where opportunity creation comes from, like, it doesn't come from the sky. It comes from SDRs. Where bookings come from, it's not magic. It comes from the bookings of each individual account executive being added up together. Right? And where that comes from is not just, you know, from this, again, from the sky. It comes from the quantity of customer facing meeting volume that all our account executives are engaged in across all those account executives. So this is why it's really important for us to be paying attention to getting very granular with respect to those goals at a human level. And so these are a couple of ways that, you know, a couple of ways to be effective at kind of goal setting here. One, we got to set those targets, right? We can't just like, you know, all right, guys, we're going to start measuring customer facing meetings. We're going to start measuring, you know, the number of contacts you're engaging SDRs, or the number of you know, emails you're sending, or the number of calls you're making. You have to specifically say, hey, we have an expectation that you are sending 500 customer facing emails, and then you know, or like, we have an expectation that you're setting this number of customer facing emails, or we want you to have this level of email response rate. So then what you might say is like, okay, well, how do I get to that, right? And then there's kind of a couple of different ways that we could do so, and it's kind of like a blend. So first, what you want to do is look at historical performance. So oftentimes you have what is an appropriate level of performance for your team, literally in your existing team. Right. So this is actually one of the reasons why people really enjoy Atrium is, you know, they turn on an Atrium account in like 2 or 3 minutes. And then what they're able to do is not just look at like go forward performance, they're able to look back across their SDR team or their AE team and say like, oh, okay, this is the right level of, you know, opportunity ownership that these guys should have, or this is the right level of meeting volume that these guys should have, or this is the right level of, you know, of like email volume that these folks should have. So like going back and looking at historical performance can be really effective there. Second, what you can do is you can use a bottoms up model. Right. So what you can do is you can say, hey, look, we were talked about this earlier. What should they be doing? The other thing you can do is you can look at how much of it should be doing based on how much time it takes in order to do that thing. So use an account executive as an example. You know, we have like a prototypical deal costs a certain amount, or takes a certain amount of customer facing meetings that people should be having in order to complete that deal. Okay, great, right? So like there's 40 hours in a week. Our reps can have, you know, are they outside reps or inside reps? Maybe they're inside reps. Okay, they could probably have like 15, maybe at max 20 customer facing meetings a week without negatively impacting their ability to follow up. Okay, cool. That kind of indicates how many opportunities that they could potentially manage concurrently. So that's like how to do that from a bottoms up standpoint. The last thing that you can do is you can do benchmarking. If you're able to access benchmarking data from folks, you can understand, you can understand what other similar sales motions might look like as compared to yours. This can be a little bit challenging in order to kind of get this information. This is actually one of the things that we do with our customers, is because we're at the point where we have like 300 customers, we're able to do anonymized benchmarking across like similar sales motions. And so those are kind of like different ways you can do that. And then what you should do is you should then blend that kind of these things together, draw a line in the sand and say, hey, you know what, we're going to start with this. These are defensible, right? These, like, I didn't just pull these out of my ear. These are the reasons why we think these are defensible goals. We're going to start with that. And then what you can do is you can kind of iterate based on that. Lastly, the thing that you need to do is you actually need to like publish them, right? Actually tell people, hey, these are the things, like these are what our goal should be. And we actually have like a publishing template here that folks can use. I think we can drop that into the chat here. But the point is like, hey, we're going to select these metrics, and then we're going to set these goals, right? These initial goals, and then we're going to publish them so people can say like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to do every week, every month, et cetera, in order to have success there. Cool. And so these are just some kind of examples here. Like these are, it's kind of hard. Some metrics, it's easy to kind of like make suggested goals there, right? So like as an account executive, we all have like 40 meetings, or sorry, if we all have like 40 hours in the week. So, anywhere between like 7 to 15 customer facing meetings is probably legit there. Anywhere between like 50 or 150 emails, the number of accounts that people can be touching on a per week basis is probably like pretty banded. As you get up into like other kind of metrics that are more kind of sales motion contingent, like bookings or deal cycle, what have you, it's a little harder to kind of benchmark there, but you certainly can benchmark down here, right? Where you can say like, hey, this is like what you should be spending your time doing. Like you're here to sell, you're not here to golf. These are the things that you should be like, that we can hold you accountable to. Similarly, we have our SDR suggested goals here, kind of a similar situation there, where depending on like, sales motion dependent, it might be, a certain number of emails, a certain number of calls. Are you more call heavy? Maybe there's less emails, right? Are you not call heavy because like, I don't know, you sell to engineers or developers or whatever, and they don't, want to talk to people on the phone. Maybe you're more email heavy. But here are some kind of like, metrics that are suggested goals there. Great. So then now we've got our goal set, or sorry, we've got our metrics selected. We've got our goals tracked. We're establishing our next, what we needed to do is establish our day-to-day operating rhythm, because what that's going to do is that's going to make it such that these things that like these metrics that we selected and these goals that we've set are actually being actioned, that like people are being held accountable to them. We're tracking progress towards them. We're tracking completion of them or non-completion of them, because if we don't, that's where we intervene, right? That's where we catch those issues ahead of time and intervene and like do the work of management. So some kind of like examples of distribution and kind of helping take assets and distribute like metrics-based assets and distributing them throughout the organization. One, I'm a big fan of like URLs. Like you can kind of see this here with like our like most packages, analytics packages, whether it's like, specific to sales, like data-driven sales management, like Atrium, or something like that's more horizontal, like Tableau or Looker or what have you. Like they're going to have the ability to have unique URLs. Like you kind of see this right here. Like I have, a bunch of my forecasting assets with Atrium, but then also some Salesforce forecasting stuff as well. Take advantage of the fact that those reports or dashboards are unique URLs, and you can bookmark them. You can put them in calendar events. You can put them into, meeting agenda documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like take advantage of the fact that these things are URLs and like, put them in the places where they need to be. Next, you can, some solutions, not all, allow for really easy distribution of these assets. to come to you. And that's a really important thing because, as a sales manager and as an SDR manager, you're running around like crazy. And it can oftentimes be very challenging to say to yourself, hey, you know what I should really do right now? I should go look at this dashboard. I should go look at this report or what have you. And so if you take advantage of something that can distribute and come to you, like whether that's via email or via Slack distribution or what have you, that can be very effective to make sure that like those assets are coming to you at the appropriate time. So like at the appropriate cadence. So like as an example, that might be something like, maybe you have what we call a rise and shine dashboard that shows up on that kind of like lets everybody understand like, okay, cool, are we hustling this week, are we taking care of business, are we moving towards our goals this month? Maybe that shows up on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. Or a look back for last week versus the month in progress, that might show up on a Monday morning. Right, so just being kind of thoughtful about that and making sure that these assets show up at the appropriate time so we can put our eyes on them and then take action appropriately. Cool. And so a really great way of making sure that metrics actually ends up being consumed is just weaving it into meetings, right? And so meetings are a really important part of an effective operating rhythm. Not just because like they're good for information distribution and kind of like discussion and what have you, but they force you to take actions that are on the calendar. One of the jokes that we talk about here at the Atrium sales organization was we say calendar is destiny. And so by making sure that these things are on the calendar, whether it's your sales team meeting or a pipeline review meeting or a one-on-one or what have you, and then weaving in metrical assets to them, is you're ensuring the consumption of them in order to make sure that folks are doing the things like that we're consuming this information to then make judgments on, right? And so these are some kind of like examples of what that might look like in practice. Like this is a meeting invite here. This is actually from a long time ago. I've now moved our sales team meeting has its own agenda template that has like hyperlinks all over the place for linking to like various Atrium assets. As I kind of noted earlier, you can use the heck out of bookmarks. This is before I went emoji crazy. I'm a big fan of emojis, as you can tell. Oh, actually, here's the sales team meeting agenda. Yeah, so like these are all just hyperlinks to various reports. Like most of these are done on Atrium here, but some of them link off to things in other systems, like whether that's Salesforce or something like Google Sheet or what have you. But making sure that there's a bunch of that those assets are there, such that when you're preparing for that meeting, you're able to consume that information and say, oh, I see this issue right here. I see this issue right here. I'm going to talk about that in that meeting. And then you can see some examples of like what those broadcasts look like. This is kind of like a prototypical operating rhythm, like such that if you have metrics woven into these meetings, you need to make sure that those meetings are happening at the appropriate point in time to make this happen. This is like a variation of our operating rhythm. We have daily stand-ups. Actually, there's a typo here. We don't have a stand-up on Monday because we have our sales team meeting. Like we have our sales team meeting on Monday. It has a bunch of topics that we go through in addition to a bunch of different metrics. We have midday, we have actually morning stand-ups that we do that look at the prior day's metrics. And then we have a number of other things as well. Like there's a pipeline review. We have one-on-ones with all of our team members, et cetera, right? And so this is what some of those agendas can look like. Like, the stand-up's duration is only 15 minutes. This is a stand-up can be a very, very, very effective thing in a remote environment because it's like, all right, cool. Especially I like morning stand-ups, realistically. Midday can be, if you have a very distributed organization that has people in different time zones, you could potentially do something midday. I like kind of like the starting gun stand-up that happens at the morning. It's like, great, here's where we're at with respect to activity yesterday and so far this week. We got some wins going on. Are there any challenges? Okay, great. Let's get on with our day here. And you can kind of see what some of these others look like as well. Cool. So like just quick commercial for Atrium. As I noted earlier, we make data-driven sales management software. Literally what it exists to do is help people do all these problems, like solve all these problems that we've been talking about. But specifically what our belief is that sales managers, so SDR managers, AE managers, AMCSM managers, if you want to be a modern sales manager, you need to be able to manage with metric, and the mechanism by which you're going to do that is you really deserve purpose-made software that solves that problem. And so in the case of Atrium, what that looks like is Atrium has every single KPI you could care for on your AE, SDR, AM, CSM team. It's all pre-baked out of the box. It takes 3 minutes to set up. It hooks directly into the CRM in a read-only capacity, and then populates those metrics. There's really like no configuration required. It's all automated. And then more importantly, what it does is it tracks progress towards those goals, right, that you can set, and then does statistical analysis on all those metrics in order to help a manager understand where there are issues on their team. Like this rep right here has a win rate problem, and the reason why he has this win rate problem is because he has this, this conversion rate problem out of this stage right here. Or on the flip side, here's the reason why this rep is outperforming as compared to others, and here's the root cause associated with that. You should get everybody else doing that as well. And in short, what that does is it helps sales managers use data to improve the team performance, to help get ahead of issues before they become problems, and really systematize areas of success across the rest of their team. We help hundreds of customers do this. It's fun stuff, and we'd love to talk with you. And then moreover, if you just want to get started yourself, you can just go to atriumhq.com and sign up for your own free account there. Again, it takes like 2 or 3 minutes. You can just sign in with your Salesforce account. It's a read-only connection, and you'll be on your merry way with a free account. Cool. So lastly, what we're going to talk about is using this information that we've talked about to date. So the metrics, the goals, the operating rhythm, to detect issues and then resolve them. And this is like, this is a variation of the content that we cover in our data-driven coaching masterclass. I think we can drop a link to that. It's a little like it's its own 45-minute presentation on that's a more expanded version of that, but we'll just kind of like do the Cliff's Notes here. So the big thing is like the reason why we do all these things is not just for funsies, right? The reason why we do this is to detect issues and then change rep behavior. That's like, as a manager, that's your job, right? You're here to identify issues, right? And then fix them, right? To like change rep behavior for the better in order to drive higher performance on your team. And the way that you drive higher performance on your team is by lifting the performance of the individuals themselves. And so this is what that kind of like looks like in practice. So first, what we need to do is we need to detect potential issues, right? We have to flag things. And so what that might look like in practice here would be a rep who's off as compared to their past performance, right? Like if somebody's if their win rate is declining, or as an SDR, if their opportunity creation is declining as compared to their team, or they're not hitting goals. Those would be examples of like issues to detect. Or the flip side, right? Are they outperforming as compared to themselves historically, or out as compared to their peers? Like, does this SDR right here have a dramatically higher email engagement rate or email response rate as compared to their peers? Okay, why is that happening? What are they doing? Right? Like let's figure out what that is, because then what we can do is we can systematize that. And so the way that we're going to do this is by looking at the metrics and the goals that we talked about earlier in those operating rhythm, and looking for those issues to say, oh, I got an issue right there. Let's go ahead and have a conversation about it. So then the next thing you do is once you catch that issue, is you say, hey, you know what? I got to diagnose what's happening here. Like I'm seeing that this AE is pacing poorly with respect to their bookings. Okay, what's the deal there? Why is that? And so what you need to do is go upstream from that output metric. Again, this is why it's really important for us to be instrumenting input metrics as well. We have to go upstream to those input metrics to understand where there might be an issue there. And we'll talk about this in a second when we get into some of these visuals. So then once we have a hypothesis of what that issue might be, then we need to discuss that with a rep and kind of agree with the resolution, like the next steps there. And so, this is what one-on-ones are most effective for this. And we also do a master class on data-driven one-on-ones. I think maybe we can drop a link to that in the chat here. But that's a great place to have those conversations. Like, hey, I'm seeing this right here. I noticed this. Let's talk about that. Is there a reason why, like, why do you think that you have, dramatically fewer customer facing meetings than the other 10 AEs on this team? Let's talk about that. Oh, is that because, you're getting pulled into internal meetings? Is that because is that because your opportunity count is lower than your, like, let's figure out what's going on there and co-create a solution for that. And then lastly, what we have to do is, like, once we've had that communication and prescribed a solution, we got to loop back again. And this is why having a good operating rhythm, like in a one-on-one, can be very effective, because we loop back again and say, hey, we thought that your win rate was being negatively impacted by your pipeline hygiene and the fact that you have a really problematic untouched ops counts and stuck ops. Cool. We prescribed a solution to you. Said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to put 2 2-hour blocks on your calendar for you literally to go to this hyperlink, this report right here. Again, hyperlinks, URLs, our friends. And you're going to go through that, and you're going to touch those. You're either going to close, if the op is dead, you're going to close it out. Or if the op needs to be engaged, you're going to engage it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to loop back in a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is that our operating rhythm is, and we're going to see what that looks like. We're going to see what that untouched opportunity count looks like, and I'm going to hold you accountable for that, right? Because we're agreeing on that together. And so then, like, that's that loop, right, where we sniff out the issues, we remediate them. If the issue is remediated, wonderful. Then we get to find the new issue. Like, there's always an area for improvement. Or alternatively, if that issue hasn't been remediated, okay, what's the deal there? What's blocking you from remediating this? Because we saw that this was the issue and we agreed that we were going to solve it. What's the deal there, right? But importantly, what you need to do is you need to have this looping behavior here, and this is something that we talk about again in that master class on data-driven coaching. In terms of diagnosis, these are a couple like handy assets that we use for this. Actually, where are mine? They're around here somewhere. Here they are. We've got these laminates right here. This is essentially like a metrics driver tree where it helps you understand what the inputs are to these issues, right? So we say we've got a bookings issue with our a given account executive. Okay, where's that coming from? Is that coming from a low count of wins, right? Or alternatively, is it coming from an insufficient average selling price? Right? Somebody selling deals that are too small, or is their deal cycle elongating, so their deals are getting pushed out? Okay, well, maybe it's coming from the number of wins. Okay, well, where do wins come from? Well, wins come from the number of attempts across the win rate there, right? And okay, and so what we can do is we can figure out where the issue is. Oh, this person's win rate's fine. Oh, they're just not getting enough at bats. Uh-oh, okay, is that because like their number of ops in their pipe is problematic? Is it because the number of new opportunity inflow is off, et cetera, et cetera? Or is it actually a win rate problem? Okay, well, maybe it's a win rate problem as compared to their peers. Where is that coming from? Is that because they have pipeline hygiene problems, right? Their number of untouched ops is off as compared to where it should be. Is it because they have an opportunity conversion problem where things are falling out of their pipe, like maybe mid funnel with respect to the number of maybe there's like a pilot motion and their conversion rate, like getting out of the pilot into the next step into like a proposal state is substantially lower than their peers. Whatever it is, like something's going on there and we want to address it. And so this is what we mean when we talk about like going right. We actually have these laminates that we're happy to send to people. We actually send them out like crazy to our customers, and also now we have them set up so we can send them out to people who are not Atrium customers. I think we're going to go ahead and drop a link if you want to get a copy of these laminates. They're an amazing desk reference for folks to be able to look at. Cool, and then you can do the same thing on the SDR side of things as well. Wonderful. So the next kind of thing that, like, as you're diagnosing, one of the things that you want to be able to pay attention to is, is this an issue with an individual rep, or is it an issue across the entire is this an issue across the individual rep, or is it an issue across the entire team, right? Because if it's an issue with respect to an individual rep, then we can target that. If it's an issue across the entire team, well, that actually might be something bigger. That might be like a market issue. It might be an economy issue. It might be a fill in the blank issue. It might be a lead source issue, all these different things. So it's important for us to differentiate there. And this is why getting super granular at the rep level is really important. And the way that we can kind of like suss that out is like, in order to figure out if this is a rep issue versus a team issue, is we can look at the individual reps and say, hey, is this rep's metric in line with their peers, right? Is it in line with their peers? This is especially helpful if you have like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 reps that are kind of similar to this rep, is you can say, hey, you know what? This is like generally the level of like customer facing meeting volume or like multi-threading or conversion out of this opportunity stage as compared to their peers. Okay, is this person off? Great, that indicates to me that there's something we can improve here. And then lastly, look at whether or not something is like a skill versus a will issue. And these are just like, shorthands for kind of like these quality versus quantity metrics. Usually if it's a skill issue, which is going to be like a quality metric, so like a conversion rate issue, right? People not like a newly promoted SDR who's having a hard time getting opportunities out of discovery. That would be a skill issue. We can train on that. If it's a will issue, just kind of like a level of effort issue, well, I think that those are a little bit like, oftentimes those are a little bit harder to kind of coach up, because sometimes you can't fix a lack of grit and you can't fix a lack of like oomph. And so usually in those sort of situations, it's more important to just like have coaching around that and say like, hey, look, I'm seeing this shortfall right here. We need to improve that. But oftentimes the more effective thing there is really just like to early identify somebody who is maybe a bad hire, who doesn't have the level, like the motor or like the level of like oomph that is required for successful selling. And then next, what we need to be able to do is have these effective performance conversations. And this is actually one of the laminates we have as well that we send out when we drop that link. In addition to the laminates here, this is also like a good cheat sheet around making performance conversations really kind of easy. The last thing we're going to touch on here is just like a case study of this in practice. This actually was really kind of fascinating to see this happen. Like one of our customers shared this with us the other day, so we've anonymized it, but it was really fascinating, where they had this situation where they hired a new rep. He was in seat like 2, 3, 4 months, and they kind of like got a little bit of like a spidey sense going on. Atrium was kind of like talking to them about like some potential issues there. And so this is why I think this is a really good case study around why this rep, and again, this is anonymized right here. You can see there's this rep, Chicken Little, right here, little Disney character names, was kind of struggling. And so what you can kind of see here is like, if you were tracking opportunity ownership in ramp, so this right here is like, this is the number of opportunities that the reps own. This is a specific ramping view in Atrium, where you can see that like everybody's start dates have been normalized at time equals 0 here. And you can see how this pipe has been building over time. You can kind of see like the general levels there. So in this case, this Chicken Little right here has a good number of ops. So if you're only paying attention to that, you might think that everything was okay. The fascinating thing is that if you look at like a precursor, like the number, like how well is this person engaging and touching their ops? Well, what you can kind of see is that it's actually substantially off as compared. So this person has a goodly number of ops, but they're actually not working them. And then moreover, if you look at not just their op engagement, but also the number of unique accounts or kind of like companies for like prospecting behavior they're doing, you can see that it's extremely low as compared to peers, right? And like this was identifiable like in month 2, in month 3. And then moreover, if you look at like just email volume as compared to their peers, there's something, and again, all of these reps do the same job. These are all like, mid-market account executives that like should be like, their behaviors should look similar to each other. But this rep is really just like not engaging in any email volume whatsoever. Moreover, what you can see here is that if you look at the progressions of those opportunities, so we have all these opportunities, but if we look at the number of stages that they're advancing to, right? So this is the number of disco stages that the rep is getting to, you can see that he's quite low as compared to his peers up here. And then moreover, something really takes a turn for the worse here in month 4 here, right? So it's like not even like not great here, and then gets like dramatically worse over here. So something is like really kind of like amiss there. And then moreover, it's not just like, you know, getting into disco. If you look at like downstage or down funnel, like solution presentation, again, starts out not so great, and then gets, you know, then gets even worse over time there. And so what happens as a result is you can kind of see that his bookings were light as compared to his peers, but then they really get bad as from a pure delta standpoint here. You can see, you know, all these reps, like this is where these reps should be in month 3, in month 4, and this rep is way down here. And it's not surprising that he's way down there, because like if you look at it, not only is he not engaging in the requisite activity in order to generate new opportunities in terms of account engagements, even the opportunities that he is like does have in his pipe, he's not really working, which then shows up in these opportunity progressions, right? The fact that he's getting some to disco, but then that really falls off, and then certainly not getting things down pipe. And so this is where like the chickens come home to roost, so to speak. Chicken Little, haha. The chickens come home to roost here and here as a result of things not getting in disco here because this low activity was happening over here. And so this is this is a remote rep who wasn't in office with his team. Like this is an example of two things. One, a remote rep that needs to be paid attention to, and then secondarily, an example of why it's so important to be paying attention to these things in ramp, because like this is the output. And then moreover, if you look at him as compared to his peers in the first quarter or first 6 months of his tenure, he's underperforming his peers by more than 40%. And like that's meaningful, right? Like if you have an organization of 10 account executive, like 5 account executives, 10 account executives, having a single rep who's like underperforming by like 50%, that's a huge problem. And so this is just like a great example of, I mean, this unfortunately is like a little bit of like a bummer of an example of, you know, somebody, in this case, the rep was actually like not working on the things that he needed to be working on because he's working on other stuff as well, or instead. But like, this is just like a great cautionary tale as to why it's so important to be paying attention to these things from a leading indicator standpoint, not just from a lagging indicator standpoint, because again, as we were kind of like joking about earlier about like old school sales management, like, oh, I only care about outputs. Okay, well, by the time it became clear that this was an output problem in like month 4 or month 5, this person's kind of been like hanging out, not engaging in the behaviors that need to be engaging for 2, 3, 4 months. And so instead, if we pay attention to those leading indicators, like we can see right here in month 1, month 2, and month 3, like, hey, what's going on here? Right? Like what's going on here? We should have been able to catch this in month 2 and month 3. And in these guys' case, I think they did catch it, and they were kind of having those conversations, kind of contending with how to manage this, but so much better than dealing with this in month 6, month 7, month 8, and month 9 by having really good metrical eyes on remote staff, especially when they're in ramp. So just a little case study of like why this is so important there. So in summary, you know, I hope everyone really enjoyed the event. The big thing here is really like what we want to do for our hybrid instrumentation is we want to use metrics as our eyes and ears. We got to set and track those goals, establish our day-to-day operating rhythm, and then detect, troubleshoot, and resolve these potential issues here. In closing, would love it if we're going to go ahead and drop a link to these books right here. If you want to sign up for those, we'll send those out to you. You know, as a thank you for a quick disco chat with our team. And again, if you want to, you know, if you're interested in getting amazing at data-driven sales management, you can head over to atriumhq.com, sign up for your own Atrium account. Again, it takes like 2 or 3 minutes through a read-only connection to your Salesforce account. So what do you think, Hannah? Did we cover enough?
We covered more than enough. That was an awesome presentation, Pete. I think everyone got some new insights on managing remote and hybrid reps. In the promo for this, I was like, whether you're brand new to sales management or you've been doing this for decades, like you're going to take away something new. And I'm sure you all have. So that being said, thank you so much for today's presentation, Pete. And thank you everyone for attending today's session. To learn more about Atrium, don't hesitate to head over to atriumhq.com. And you can go ahead and head over to Atrium's booth in this little Goldcast interface, which is an awesome feature. So just a reminder that the recording and key takeaways will be available on the MSP website shortly, and you'll also be emailed them. Don't forget to check out MSP's upcoming 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening next week. It's coming up. So can't wait to see you all there, and have an awesome day.
Bye, Anna.